And welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today's review, we are taking a look at the Fission Time-Lapse from Axiom Discs. So this video is primarily going to be highlighting the time-lapse and the Fission plastic. However, I will have some comparisons to the Neutron throughout the video. But first, let's look at the profile and the feel. And this Fission plastic, oh my goodness, what an extreme amount of pop top it has, and a very high shoulder as well, making this very deep feeling driver. And when it comes to like the Neutron, as you can see, a more gradual shoulder, slight dome, much flatter flight plate. I mean, the Fission is almost a completely different animal. It's almost like a UFO when put side by side to the Neutron. In fact, with that extreme amount of pop top, it has its own heartbeat. Even though the flight plate is so thin you can manipulate it, the inner part of the rim is extremely stiff. I mean, it's like rock hard, which means I have to adjust my grip and slide my thumb further into the flight plate, creating a really awkward grip. I feel like I'm almost trying to throw a plate when I'm trying to grip this thing. And as you can see, I can barely pinch the flight plate between my thumb. Just a very awkward grip. That is the one biggest pet peeve that I have about the time-lapse when it comes to this Fission plastic. So my baby hands does have to give the Fission time-lapse a big thumbs down when it comes to feel, but can the flight redeem it? Now, since I'm a slower arm speed player, I am primarily focusing on the Fission time-lapse in the higher 150 and lower 160 gram range. And as we're going to see compared to a Neutron time-lapse later on in the video, it is a night and day difference between the Neutron and the lower weight Fission. For instance, when I throw the Fission on hyzer, I actually get it to flip up to flat, it'll ride straight, and then have a decent finish towards the very end of the flight as it stalls. When I do throw it flat, it gets a little bit of kind of a gentle meandering turn in the mid-flight, before, depending on the height, it either has very minimal fade or a decent amount of fade if I throw it a little bit higher. And then once I do start putting it on anhyzer lines, it is holding the anhyzers all the way to the ground, or depending again on height angle, it starts to flex out just at the very tail end of the flight. And this thing just absolutely bombs. This was thrown slight hyzer, flipped up to flat, gets a little bit of turn in the mid-flight, and then has a strong finish at the end. It's just, these things just keep on going. The amount of glide that the Fission plastic has, because of that extreme pop top, it just likes to keep on going. So even if you can't throw extremely far, this is going to keep pushing the boundaries of how far that you can throw with that immense glide, and also with the decent amount of understability that it has, at least in the lighter weights. I mentioned flipped up to flat when thrown on a hyzer, and then it had a little bit of a finish towards the very end, and when thrown flat, you can see that little bit of turn, and then almost no fade whatsoever when thrown low. When thrown higher, again, it gets a little bit more of a fade. And what I like with the Fission plastic over the Neutron, because it's so much less stable, it's gonna have a little bit more of a forward penetrating finish instead of a dump. So for slower arm speed players, this is going to be a max distance driver. Yes, I don't like the feel of it, but I cannot knock the results when it comes to throwing. This is an absolute beast of a distance driver when throwing, and for bigger arms, you're not really going to get too much use out of it unless you're wanting to use it as a really like long distance roller. But for players with slower arms like myself, into the medium arm speed players, those players who can throw that 375, 400 range, this may be one of the longest throwing discs that you will have in your bag. And even though the initial part of the flight, that high speed portion of the flight, it is on the slightly understable side, I was actually impressed with the sneaky amount of torque resistance that it has. So that way I can throw it on a forehand and it wouldn't necessarily turn all the way over. I could get it to hold some really effortless flex shots. Alright, now that we've seen it on a wide open field, how about on actual disc golf holes? Well, for a lefty like myself, this hole is perfect for a forehand. I mentioned how there's a sneaky amount of torque resistance with the Fission time-lapse when it comes to forehand, which allows me to easily match the shape of the fairway, avoiding the danger on the left, but then also hyzering out just before the danger on the right. This hole, I can't necessarily reach it for a backhand, so I know I'm going to try to throw something on a flex that is going to try to hyzer out before it reaches the trees on the left-hand side, starting it on that turnover line, it's gonna hold it, and then as you see, just the very end of the flight, it likes to stable out and then have a very minimal fade. For this hole, there's a made-up Mando that I want to hit on a slight anhyzer line and let the Fission time-lapse kind of ride to the left before just at the very end of the flight stabling out. And with its understability in that kind of early mid-flight, it has no trouble whatsoever hitting that line. One thing I found very interesting about the Fission time-lapse, maybe because it's that great glide, it's very forgiving. This was a popped up shot, nose up, absolutely terrible shot, versus this was a much more direct, much lower, and they both went nearly the same distance. They were within about 5 feet of each other. And that was something I consistently noticed, that even my poor shots with the Fission time-lapse were generally within the same ballpark when it came to my better shots. So that means that if I flubbed the shot, I was not missing out on too much distance. Even with a flub shot, this thing absolutely bombs. So for the first half of the lefty lines, we are throwing the Fission versus the Neutron. Neutron being a 172, the Fission the 158. And you can just see just how much more dramatically overstable the Neutron is for me versus the Fission. The Fission starts out straight, gets a little bit of turn in that mid-flight before then at the very end of the flight having a very baby hyzer, whereas the Neutron, as soon as it gets 2/3 of the way through the flight right there, it all of a sudden gets on that hyzer angle and it is gone, and you can see a much more of a dumpy finish. Now, I've heard people say the Fission time-lapse is the slower arm speed's destroyer. Well, let's put that to the test. This was the Fission time-lapse up against both a lighter weight Halo destroyer and then also a very lightweight Star Destroyer. So for me, the flight path of the lighter weight Halo destroyer better matched that of the Neutron time-lapse. However, I will say that the lighter weight Halo was a bit easier to control. It went out a little bit further before it had that very dumpy finish. So definitely more, even though it's very overstable, definitely better, more suited to my arm speed. And to no surprise, when it comes to the very lightweight Star Destroyer, it was the most understable of the bunch. So overall, I do think that the time-lapse, if you want to get it to kind of match the Destroyer, you do have to play around with the weights a little bit. I do think the lighter weight Fission time-lapses are going to act pretty similarly to lightweight destroyers, so I do understand why people are making that comparison. Well, thank you all so much for making it to the end of the video. I greatly appreciate the support. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. Please smash the like button on this video. It really helps out the YouTube algorithms in getting this video out to more and more people who might find it useful. Also, be sure to visit me over on Instagram, and if you need to purchase any new discs for yourself, go visit GreatLakesDisc.com. Use that code LEFTY at checkout. You are going to save yourself money, and you are also going to be helping support the channel. I greatly appreciate it. And until the next review, everyone, keep banging chains.